Welcome to the Journos. I'm Peter Martin. Hugh McDonald and Alison McConnell are here with me, of course, for the next hour. We're delighted that you've joined us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel, and if you download the app, you'll get all the breaking news at your fingertips. Domestic issues, slightly further afield. We always like to have a good argument on the Journos. Of course, Scottish football is just the show that keeps on giving. Because usually now we're at the point where we're not actually questioning our sanity, Hugh, on, well, he's only had 5 games in the Premier League and he's due the sack.
Yep. It started early. Usually they used to say that the sacking season was November, so it's whatever Nelson life, it's getting a bit earlier now, you know.
Is it the point where we are we susceptible more to a fringe of fans who've got no tolerance whatsoever for that, and then you have a boardroom where they actually literally fold under the pressure of people who just do not want to give managers time? Because Craig Levein certainly was surprised he was sacked. Steven Naismith probably less so because of the run they were on.
I don't think Steven Naismith was surprised. I think Steven Naismith, whatever your views, pro or against, one would imagine he's an intelligent realist who has played for clubs at the highest level and knows the imperatives of those clubs. I know Alison was there, we've had a conversation about it. Alison was there in Paisley on Saturday, and as an experienced journalist said to me the other day, oh no, you know, that's breaking point, and so it proved to be. And I think when I looked at the record, I think it's 8 games without a win at Hearts. In fact, it's worse than 8 games without a win. It's 8 losing games. Am I correct in that, Alison?
Yeah.
So that then becomes...
It's also when you marry that to the fact that Aberdeen have done so well. Yeah. So you think Aberdeen have banked all these points. So even now, at this early point in the season, you think making up that distance is a big ask.
Yeah, and the Levein one's different, slightly different in that I think it's new owners come in and they look at it and they sit down and they do a diligence thing on it and say, right, where are we? Where are we going? Is this the man to take us there? And the answer they came to pretty sharply was no.
I think the Craig Levein one was interesting, the fact that he gave his press conference. You know, he'd done a routine pre-match press conference at 1 o'clock and then finished it, talked about his long-term plans and then realised that his long-term plans actually were going to be quite substantially different.
But I'm wondering now, on the basis that we have, you know, this knee-jerk reaction almost to certain runs of results. You know, Rangers, and we will talk about Rangers a little later on in the show, but Rangers also have a manager who has to produce results. Now, he's made certain comments about Celtic in January. They'll see them at Ibrox, which is fine. He's building his side, and, you know, the outgoing chairman, John Bennett, basically said we have to have a long-term strategy. John Gilligan has been speaking, saying, you know, he's backing the manager. So you get to that situation where you say, well, you know, you've put yourself right behind the 8 ball with that line, on the basis that you've got to back him, you've got to show that spine and say, if there's a result that doesn't go their way and Celtic were to go further ahead in the league long before you get to Ibrox in the 2nd of January, if they lost the League Cup final, if they reached the League Cup final against Celtic and lost it, you know, would that in turn increase it again? Because fans' revolt would be, yeah, we're all right with your long-term plan, but, you know, we're not happy that the manager hasn't delivered.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think you can look at it pragmatically and say he needs time, or he's asked for time, or he said he needs time, and blah, blah, blah. You look at where Celtic are financially, where Celtic are on and off the park. They're in a different stratosphere from anyone else, including Rangers in that. But the reality is that the Rangers support expect to be the best. They expect to be successful. They expect to be challenging. They expect to be winning. They're not going to sit back quite quietly and say, well, let's watch Celtic canter to a title. And it, you know, there's double figures between the two teams at the end of the season. It's not going to be palatable to anyone. So I think there's a theory and then there's a reality. And for me, the reality is that any manager at either Celtic or Rangers who's 5 points behind the other is walking a tightrope, because you can't afford to lose any more points.
Yeah, and with Hearts, I think he made a rod for his own back because he had this successful season. Steven Naismith, he got them to third. They were playing European football. Obviously, it comes with the pressures of that on the squad. Here's my take on Steven Naismith this season and why basically he faced the sack slightly. It's not controversial, Hugh, but in my mind, Lawrence Shankland not scoring goals is the reason. Because sometimes strikers can paper over the cracks of the deficiencies of a team.
Yeah, but they're so crucial. I mean, we've talked about this before. If you look at Motherwell's great seasons in the past, right? You go Moult, Watt, Van Veen,
Higdon
even going back further.
Theo Bair even.
And now he's doing well. Theo Bair. If you talk about if you talk about how good Aberdeen came on last year, you talk Majowski,
Martin Boyle, Hibs.
Martin Boyle. You go round that. If you strip 31 goals, I mean, I know the season hasn't run, but if you strip that capability for your team, and let's be frank, it has been stripped from the team because Shankland, for whatever reason, just simply hasn't been performing.
Yeah.
And there might be various reasons for that. But if you strip that with a team, it leaves you vulnerable because nobody is going to sit on a Saturday night in Gorgie Road over their pint and say, do you know what, our XG was as good as it was last season. In fact, our XG is a wee bit better. Or, do you know what, I think you're keeping possession a lot better in midfield. No, you didn't score and you've just been beat 1-0. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and if you look at it, last season, by 6 games in, he'd scored 5 goals.
Right.
He was hot last season. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think he had a fantastic campaign. It's that old chestnut. You're confident, you believe you're going to score, you're scoring for fun. And then when it dries up, all of a sudden, it's just not, the wee things just aren't breaking for you. Nothing's coming off. You're hitting the woodwork, you're putting stuff past, and you can sense the lack of confidence and the lack of belief in the player, and that until you score, that hangs over you. But I agree with you. I think you take a goal scorer out of a team, and any team is going to struggle. And Hearts were so reliant on him last season.
Yeah,
because if you've got real quality right throughout the team,
chips in.
Goals come from any, you say, right. I mean, we're taking to ludicrous levels, but if you watch, say, Man City and Sunday, you can say, well, apart from Haaland's did score, you can say, well, John Stones comes up with an equaliser because they've got very good players. But generally, the funny thing about Hearts, to me, was I thought Hearts really recruited well from a position of strength. I thought Danda was a good buy. I thought I said to him, that'll give him a bit more quality. I thought Spittle was the same. The other ones looked decent. Already building on what I thought was a pretty good base. And
they'd done their work early, like they recruited early, like they brought players in.
And I thought, do you know what? I said they could. I mean, I fancied them very strongly for third place, given what was happening at Aberdeen.
Yeah, the other thing that doesn't actually help your cause is the fact that you're trying to balance European football with it as well. And the prospect of getting into the Europa League was real, and you lose out on that. And again, you can flip that and say to yourself, there's great comparisons with what's happening at Kilmarnock.
I was going to say
Kilmarnock are bottom of the table. They've had one win, against Tromsø. Other than that,
and there's no noise around it.
It's not a great run, and they're bottom of the table.
But there's no noise around that, and that's really interesting because I looked at that on Sunday. I was looking at the leagues on Sunday, always kind of refresh myself with the leagues because you can forget things. But see the noise about Kilmarnock to the neutral is great manager, stable club, got a bit of money through Billy Bowie, great season last season, all be fine. You go, oh, wait a wee minute, there's a league table. Yeah. Am I looking at that upside down?
6 defeats, 5 draws, and 1 win.
And it tells you as well, see the impact of Europe on a team,
it's huge.
On threadbare squads. And we've already seen it to a certain extent with Celtic, because I thought that was a really interesting team selection from Celtic on Sunday. It was basically everybody out, whistle up the other boys. And we're going to see this repeatedly through the season because Rangers will be in Sweden, right? They'll play a game, I don't know what their protocol is. Did they fly back straight after the game? But anyway, it's Friday before they're back in Scotland. Recovery day, assessment day, work on Saturday will be tactical day, shape, etc. Bang, Sunday right into it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be repeated throughout the season. It's not 3 games or 4.
The next 3 months you're managing that.
Next 3 months you're managing that.
Yeah. If anything, you know, the key now for Hearts is to try and get someone. I mean, we could put through, and I'm reading names constantly, all with a Scottish base to them. But if the Brighton camp suddenly has an influx in it, and you get the Jamestown analytics having a bearing on it, then it could change dramatically who becomes the new manager there. Liam Fox is interim, but if you're looking at the names, for me personally, if I was looking at who would be the ideal candidate for Hearts moving forward, Stephen Robinson's the out-and-out favourite. I don't know why, excuse me, for whatever reason, people are not looking at him and thinking, he knows what he's doing, he's clued up, and it's a big club, and I don't want to upset St Mirren fans, but it's a bigger club, Hearts, for him to take over. But if you're saying to yourself, well, who else fits the bill and plays football the way I think Hearts fans want to see it? John McGlynn's a stick-on. John McGlynn knows Hearts inside out. He was there with Billy Brown and Jim Jeffries. He understands the mechanics and the feelings of the fans. You know, he's had a great grounding in coaching. He's already said that he's inspired by the coaching techniques of Brendan Rodgers. You watch that Falkirk side against Celtic. They played football that was an absolute joy to watch. And if I was I mean, you might not have the gelled hair and the ideal stereotypical, modern look of a manager these days. But, for me, John McGlynn is certainly one that should be considered. The rest of it is Alec Neil, Arnar Gunnlaugsson, and Kim Hellberg are some of the names that are being bandied about at the moment as potential recruits for the role. And then, of course, the outside bet that we don't know about, Alison, is anything that suddenly the Brighton influence has in this.
I think John McGlynn's a really interesting one. I think he deserves to be mentioned in that bracket. Sometimes I think there's a familiarity with managers who have kicked about the landscape for so long that you're almost under the radar, that you're forgotten about. I think Hearts fans, judging in the evidence of what Falkirk have done, went through the campaign unbeaten last season, came up, have made a flying start. The best team that Celtic have played this season, according to Brendan Rodgers. I think for me, he deserves to be mentioned in that bracket.
Yeah, and again, the Tony Bloom factor is something we don't know about.
Yeah, my gut feeling, and I haven't had any conversations yet with anybody inside Hearts. Obviously, I will do. But looking at Andrew McKinley's press conference, reading up on Tony Bloom, which I've done, which would lead to suggest that there'll be a real intense period of due diligence here.
Yeah.
And I think my gut feeling will be they'll be sourcing people, outside the Scottish orbit. They'll at least be having really serious conversations with people outside it, because you got to remember, not just the Bloom, but people behind the scenes at Hearts as well have views about coaches that don't tie in necessarily with, at my view, which is probably a pretty stereotypical view. They'll be looking at, they are bringing in things like analytics. They're bringing things like strategy. They will be wanting to bring in, I would think, a manager that fits a certain profile, who, if all goes well, he will progress. He will progress, and then when he leaves, he will leave behind an actual fundamental style of play, and so that you just need to look at Brighton for that. But you also have to look at some of the brains at Hearts who I've talked to over the years, who look at this as a model going forward, that the coach is kind of like an interchangeable guy. He slots in, he either does very well and goes on to another club, or he doesn't do well and we get somebody else in.
Yeah, but I wonder if it's a prerequisite of the appointment is, there's a fine balance here between the foundation of Hearts and everybody looking and assessing Tony Bloom and him coming in and cash coming in and the availability of that cash to the manager. Is there a prerequisite if we are coming in, we want a major say in somebody who buys into the blueprint? Because for me, this is a line in the sand moment for Hearts, because if you are changing your strategy to embrace that Brighton blueprint, then you need to buy into all of it, which is we will recruit the manager that we know will follow the criteria, and they'll spend the money wisely. You know what I mean? So you have to buy into the whole thing. You can't
it's almost a holistic package. You're almost looking, it has to fit in with the entire structure of the club and philosophy of the club. But I think Hearts are such an attractive prospect for anyone looking in on the outside. If you're a coach or a manager, the potential at Hearts is huge, absolutely huge. And I think the opportunity for European football is there. You have access to continental competition if you can. You should be doing well enough.
We sometimes forget that Hearts, you'll be going to a club, say if they bring in, the stereotypical Scandinavian guy, which or the guy that we just don't know about that's pulling up trees in the MLS or whatever, If they come to Hearts, the first thing they'll say, goodness gracious, the Orium or the training grounds, that's terrific. What a stadium. How many supporters do you get? Sold it. 18,000 seats. What? And by the way, we will be in Europe every year. And this is, it's looking difficult already this season, but by and large, we're perennial European qualifiers.
Yeah.
Coach is looking at it and going, and then when he sees this, the budget's very good as well. We tend to talk Scottish football down a bit, fair enough, because there's reason to talk it down. But if you're coming from outside and just looking at Hearts as a package, you're saying, I fancy a bit of this.
Yeah, but if I was looking and saying, well, are they going to be in any way influenced by maybe somebody who's more homegrown and suited to their style? That's where I think John McGlynn fits the bill. Arnar Gudlausson's won 2 Icelandic titles, I think 4 cups. Your man from Hellberg is in charge of Hammarby. They're third in the table. So you're probably looking and saying, okay, what's the style of football like? How does he develop young players? John McGlynn fits all that, and we understand the Stephen Robinson scenario because of the success he's had with 2 clubs, especially with Motherwell and St Mirren. Morecambe's a different kettle of fish. I tend to view the lower leagues in England as watching Match of the Day from 1970s. Let's hit the ball long into the channels and miss out the midfield,
I watched a game, I watched Fleetwood v Morecambe the other night, and it was actually Morecambe actually got back into the game. Yeah, John McGlynn thing, I've got nothing but the highest respect for John McGlynn as a coach. I went to interview him once as well, and I have nothing but the highest respect for him as a person. These things where you don't know a guy and you go and interview him for a day drive. It was at Kirkcaldy, Raith Rovers, and you just say, after the hour and a half wandering about, you say, this, I like the cut of his jib. I always remember we went into the. He says, we're doing up the dressing rooms. This is for the influx of money at Raith Rovers, and we're doing this and we're doing that. We're doing that. I says, who's this royal we that we're doing this? He says, we're talking about we're painting this. And I says, are you painting it? He says, aye.
Yeah,
I'm painting this.
Yeah, and by the way,
you went what?
Hugh, I don't have any money in this. By the way, I don't have any stake in it.
I don't have any stake, but you can. I don't think you can meet John McGlynn and not have the highest respect for him. Honestly, I really don't. And I don't think you can look at his record and say, and I include Raith Rovers very strongly in this, by the way. If you look at if you look at his CV, and he had, and he was like, maybe, as you say, 20 years younger and with an Icelandic name, you say, well, wait a minute. He's done, he came knocking on the door with Raith Rovers.
Yeah.
He's taken Falkirk up to he's worked with Hearts before. Brendan Rodgers has just come out and given them the best reference that you could possibly have. Yup. The thing that's against John McGlynn, I think, is that well, maybe two things. Maybe, I don't know if John McGlynn is desperate for it is one reason, but the other thing as well is these guys come in and they don't see Tony Bloom. People have got to get an idea of what this guy is about. This guy is a gambler, right? But he's a gambler that's based on margins.
Yes.
This guy's talking about making millions of pounds, but he's making millions of pounds not at 5 to 1 and 10 to 1. He's making them in the little tiny areas in betting. He's looking at the little tiny areas and exploiting them. So to do that, you have to have a massive information. You have to have a room full of analytics guys. So these are guys that are going to, I mean, the saying is crunch the numbers. It goes beyond that.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a measured appointment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only thing I would think, I mean, I spoke to a number of managers and players when he was a manager of Raith Rovers, and we were asking who plays the best football, and they were all saying Raith Rovers play the best football in the division. If anything, what went against them was an error in judgment on the David Goodwillie situation. I think really kind of curtailed any progression with Raith Rovers, and then in comes Ian Murray. So from that point of view, that was a slight blip. Going to the Falkirk area of it, he suddenly develops a side, plays a certain way, goes to Celtic Park and puts, for me, a number of Premier League managers to shame in the way he went about his business. You know, they attacked Celtic, they pressed them. If anything, they ran out of gas. Celtic brought in the big guns, and you know, suddenly it's 5-2, which can happen. But you know, he's been lauded, and rightly so, for the way he went about his business. But I watched him. I was at the Falkirk Stadium when they beat Hearts. They rallied, you know, after a 20-minute domination by Hearts. They weathered the storm and then suddenly picked them off.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about his credentials at all. I think we would be in agreement about that. It's whether or not he fits the criteria of what Hearts will see and what they want in a coach.
Yeah, and there's a flip side to this. Again, potentially a new, you know, well, it's not potentially, it is a new owner at St Johnstone who has looked at it and said, no, we've had enough of Craig Levein. He might not have seen it coming, but we're not happy with the way things are going. We want to change. And now they've got to make a decision. Now, I'm not quite sure it's going to be in the same analytical approach that Hearts are going on this one.
Well, the whispers this morning was it's going to be pretty quiet. They've identified 3 people, and they're going to have talks pretty swiftly with them. There's also, you know, heightened speculation. You could say that Scott Brown might be one of them.
Yeah.
Which would be absolutely fascinating.
Ian Murray, Peter Levein.
Ian Murray and Peter Levein, and maybe a couple again. You can't talk about a Scottish job without a couple of Scandinavian coaches. It's your automatic 2 sides with your half chicken. You get to choose 2 Scandinavian guys to come into the field. But they look as if they're moving pretty swiftly on it. I would be. I was really intrigued with the conversations, if any, with Scott Brown, if he came into the conversation, because Ayr doing really, really well at the moment, although they lost their centre forward to Cruciate at the weekend. And that takes us back to our conversations about Tony Watt, Kevin Van Veen, etc.
Yeah.
So, but the suggestion would be that St Johnstone be maybe a quicker appointment than then that happens at Hearts. Yeah,
and the other aspect of it, the remit for St Johnstone is quite simply keep us in the division.
Yeah, without doubt, it's stay up. You know, it's such the finances involved in going down are brutal when you look at the numbers between going in, and the Championship is, as we know, can be a fairly notorious league to try and get back out of. I know Dundee United went down and came straight back, but it's not always as simplistic as that. If you look at Hamilton Accies, what's happened since you go down, it's so people get nervous when you're down at that end of the table. There's a reason why people are jittery, because the money involved changes the entire complexion of how the club can be run and is run. So I think staying in the league is a very, very base requirement.
You can give us your thoughts, who you think is going to be the manager at Hearts and St Johnstone. By the time this programme, has 3-4 days of longevity, it's like now programmes. Now you listen to them on the podcast, you watch them, and then boom, you're on to the next thing, because Scottish football is ever changing. But who do you think is the ideal manager for St Johnstone or Hearts? Give us your thoughts if you're a neutral, but certainly give us your thoughts if you're a Saints fan and a Hearts fan on this. Two big jobs with maybe differing expectations, but nevertheless, both of them want to get away from the position they find themselves in the league table at the moment. And of the runners and riders that we've mentioned, you can offer your own thoughts in our comments section. And if you're on the PLZ Soccer app, there is actually in the contact section, you can post a message or even record a video if you want us to see your face. The world is ever changing. The days of yourself, Hugh, at your absolute peak. You could say
that was a long time ago. That was last century.
You could say something. You could say something, for example, on a Monday, and it might last until the next Monday. There was a bit of longevity to it.
But nowadays, it's you say something and you go into the car and turn on the radio. I mean, Alison made the point earlier. I mean, Craig Levein's having a press conference at 1 o'clock, and all journalists are filing away from that, saying, I'll have to get the transcriptions done. I wonder what the line is.
Yeah.
How do we cut and dice this up? And by the time they'll go back to the office and they feel, by the way, Levein's just been sacked. I mean, that's how quick it's working nowadays.
And in a strange way, when we mentioned about Rangers and their decisions, there are a few key decisions coming up for Rangers. I was listening, and I'm obviously friends with John Gilligan, and he is the interim chairman of a club that we all know the expectation. We all know that the fans demand that they are winning the league. Never mind contesting it with Celtic. John went into that press conference, and I think even he admitted, you have to choose your words very, very carefully, because Rangers as a club are more intensely scrutinised, and every word was dissected, on what's the criteria you're looking for in a chairman or a chief executive, and by his every word, people come back to batter him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the most forensically examined. We saw that with John Bennett's caveat speech, where he just sat there and everybody looked at it. It was like the old days of the Kremlin experts seeing who was in the photo and what they were seeing and who was, everything was, and I'm as guilty as anybody. I mean, because you said, what, we know what he's come out here for, we know what he wants to say, but what's behind it, and I thought it was full of interesting stuff. I mean, I thought he did a good job batting away the most obvious questions. I mean, he's got to say Rangers win the league. He's got to say that. He's got to say, of course we can win the league. We're playing a wee bit better, etc., etc. The stuff behind it, I thought the interesting question when we go back again. The thing about Rangers, everybody tells you, the manager tells you, the last chairman tells you, the interim chairman tells you. If they had a chief executive, he would tell you as well, there is no money. There's no money to. It's why the first thing that they're talking about is we're looking for investment.
Well, they said there will be money in January for the manager to strengthen.
Yes, but there was
a caveat.
There was a caveat to that to approach John Bennett as well. That's what I thought the interesting. He said, we'll have to, the manager, and there was but money's coming in and money's going to come out. And the element of it, I think if money doesn't come in, the money available to the manager, of course there'll be something there. But it can't, I mean, you just have to look at recent history to predict immediate future. I mean, Clement's told us, Bennett told us, and I think to a certain extent, John Gilligan has said the same. This is a situation where they can't, for a variety of reasons, but one, that the money's just not there. They just can't go out and spend.
Even if there was the investment that comes in will be fairly conservative, you would imagine. You're not talking about going out and recruiting in January 3 or 4 hugely quality players that are going to give you the impetus to match Celtic on the pitch. It's not going to happen.
How much of the investment is earmarked just to cover the costs of what is already incurred?
Yeah, but when you take people at face value and they make a statement, this is what I'm talking about with that forensic attitude, everything is analysed under a microscope. You can only at times deal with the facts and what's staring you in the face. And I look at Rangers and I'm saying to myself, okay, they want to stay in touch with Celtic. They want to have a good European run, which of course, Rangers have been strong in Europe over 5 years. So the last thing they want is this year to have the manager suddenly falling foul of a poor European run. But if I look at their squad right now and I'm thinking to myself, I want to give that manager as much ammunition as possible. If there's going to be that caveat of there's going to be money available to him in January, well, why not? In my mind, why not get Hagi back into the fold? He's scored in the reserves and he's cranking up the pressure, which I think at the moment, I'm amazed that some people haven't looked at it and said, how can you tell us that the manager's going to have money? How can you say, and this is one quote he did make, was the AGM figures will come out and show you that we are a sustainable club with the ability, to keep going and build. Now, if that's the case, there's a story here. It's either a simple one, which is Hagi makes one more appearance in the first team, his wages get bumped up. Well, so what? So what? Pay him. He's a good player. Load the bases for the manager. You want to try and catch Celtic? Give the manager as much ammunition as you possibly can. I mean, it's one of those stories in the background that suddenly will gather pace when people are looking for ammunition to fire at them.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely intriguing one. Why he's not playing him? I think there's definitely an element of what you've just said about finances. I think there might be more to it than that as well. When you look at the Todd Cantwell situation, that they just wanted him off the books and away from the club, and I think clearly
he's not away, Ali. He's there
at least until January.
So,
but I'm not sure. To me, I would play him. I think it makes sense. I would have played Todd Cantwell too at the start. I think you try and go and play your best players and even put them in the window if you want to get them off the books, give them a platform to go and bring eyes onto them. But he's not going to play. Yeah. It's quite clear you're not going to see him.
I can understand the Todd Cantwell one because I've got a different impression on it. I didn't think he offered anything. I didn't think he offered anything better than what was on the park. I thought he flattered to deceive. Hagi's a different proposition. Hagi at times to me looked as if he had something that was better than what was on the park.
I think Hagi, the crucial thing, yeah, you've got to have the financial side about Hagi. Is it more money for him? Is it more money you for getting? Is there some contractual? You part that, but you part that by saying that if the manager is really, really keen on this guy, right? If the manager
he would play him.
He'd go to John Bennett now. John Bennett at first, or John Gilligan, and say, "Listen, I know we're hating this boy, but let's just suck it up because to get somebody better in is going to cost us money as well." So de facto, then you can look at it. The manager doesn't really fancy him because he's got in players subsequently to say, no, they'll do my number 10 role.
Or let me flip that. The manager's been told at the start there's no point in making a case for him because of these circumstances. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I don't think that's persuasive, though. Certainly according to the rhetoric coming out from John Gilligan was saying that we're backing the manager, we're going to be bloody, we're going to give him what we can and all that. That doesn't tie up with somebody saying, no, we're not going to pay this money for a player that's already in the building. My view from the outside is that the Todd Cantwell thing, for me, was settled a long time ago. It was settled in Europe when he hooked him after whatever it was, 40 minutes, because he wasn't following instructions. Does Hagi fall into the same kind of mercurial maverick role as well? And he's brought in players that he wants to play that role. He's paid good money for them. So they've backed him that way. They've said, if you want a number 10, go out and get him, and there's the money, and he has done so.
Yeah.
That suggests to me that Hagi's just out with the washing.
Yeah. How important? I mean, I don't see a greater importance on the chairman. I see a greater importance on the next chief executive of Rangers.
Goodness. I mean, where do you start? I mean, I think one of the, I mean, Bennett was slaughtered for his statement of the you know, caveats and all etc. I thought the most incredible thing he said was that we had to park our search for the chief executive, and John Gilligan said something similar. He said, you know, what happened to Hampden was a real distraction from getting the chief executive.
Yeah, but the chief executive was a day away from taking the job.
Yeah, but you say to yourself, it was a day away from taking the job. What was that, about 3 or 4 weeks ago?
Yeah.
That should all have been in place. I mean, Eddie Howe was the day in taking the Celtic job. In another sense, and Celtic had plan B and go and went. The time Eddie Howe's email had been digested, there was a Zoom call to Australia.
Yeah.
These are things that, you know, these are things that you've got to get right and got to get right quickly. I mean, Rangers, I just feel for, I mean, I don't know, I know John Gilligan, I don't know him as well as you, but at the moment I get this impression at Rangers is that John Gilligan and he's mentioned George Latham, they've been brought in and there's this huge football club which is in crisis. It's got deals to make, it's got European football, it's got Celtic. I say, these two guys, there's a feeling to me from the outside looking in, I don't know if Rangers fan again, it's two guys against the rest of the world.
Yeah.
They really need somebody in that says, that signs off on stuff, that looks at contracts, that is already working on what they might need in January. You know, I mean,
it's not a short-term role. It's a role that you need to be able to see round corners all the time. You have to be able to predict. You need, on a business sense, you need your long-term plan. You need your immediate short-term plan. You need to be planning for windows, for all eventualities. It's a huge, huge job.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, John Gilligan has got, you know, 40, 50 years experience as a top businessman with you know, in the licence trade, so he knows what he's doing. George Latham equally so. They've all put their money in at times. George Latham especially to help Rangers in difficult circumstances. Jim Gillespie was a stone's throw away from Ibrox and a hop, skip and a jump from taking the job, and then decided against it. Now what I'm looking at and saying, well, what are they doing now? Are they going back to the original list? Oh, but, you know,
I think there's a recruitment company also involved in it, so that you're casting your net far and wide.
Yeah.
But I think
they're going to the market. I think they've decided, listen, we've got to go to the market.
Got to.
Yeah.
I think you have got to. You've got to recruit for someone who's a businessman. You need someone who comes in with a very sound, experienced business background, but you also need someone who understands football, which is a hard thing to get. Like if you look at John Bennett was in charge of financial investments worth billions of pounds. Like, you know, for us who talk about hamstring injuries in games of football, that is, you know, the gravity of that position is extraordinary. And yet to go into a football club and think, I'm really struggling here with the pressures of managing this, tells you the magnitude of the job that you're going in. So I think it can't only be someone with all that business news. You also need a football affiliation too. I think it's necessary to have that, to understand it's a very unique landscape that you're working in, and although the principles of business are the pillars in which your club is founded on, you need to marry it with an understanding of the environment you're in.
Here's the one thing that I'll finish off on this topic with, which I think is why the chief executive role is probably the one of the most important appointments, as well as driving forward a strategy for financial, not just rewards, but management of the club. I think the chief executive, it's really helpful if you understand football. I take your point, Ali. The biggest problem a chief executive taking over at Rangers has is you'll have a chairman who's appointed, but you come in as a chief executive trying to manage 5 squabbling major shareholders.
Yeah.
That's a tough call, isn't it?
There's so much going on here at the moment. I think the Dave King thing is, it's not going to go away.
But it's a power struggle here.
Oh, it's absolute personal, but it's not just business, it's personal as well. I think so. I think there's a personal element to it. I think the Kings and Parks will not be exchanging Christmas cards, for example. I think that was always on the cards from the way that you saw that the statement Rangers put out when King was stepping down. You said, oops, oh my goodness, if you didn't think something was wrong, it was the understated, shall we say, to be polite nature of that. And King's shareholding means that he's not going anywhere. He's sitting there with a huge shareholding and has the power. And I thought that was an interesting thing with John Gilligan playing it very straight, because John Gilligan, of course, alongside Paul Murray, was part of the sort of triumvirate with Dave King that got the club in 2015, was that right? In 2015. So he's got a very close relationship, or had a close relationship with King, and I think that was the most punchline John King said, basically, we just wish David for a wee while.
They do get on
public
well.
nature of it.
He caveated again, we're losing this word of great. He went all about, I'll never say a bad word about him, no, that, but then went and paused, oh please.
Behave like a proper shareholder.
And
I think the public nature of it sullies the reputation of the club. It doesn't. The optics of it, they're fantastic from our point of view as journalists, fantastic for us. But the optics of a club is that you're airing your dirty laundry in public.
That's the other point that I think he was trying to just close the door on it. The biggest problem for John is he'll want to try and get a chairman in quickly. They'll want a chief executive to be appointed, but within that period of time, let's just say, for example, he wants to try and get everything done and maybe go into the new year where John can then take a step back out. The biggest problem, I think, within that period is the last thing John Gilligan wants is to be in charge if the manager's losing games.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, who's calling the shots here on this? An interim chairman? And that's really where the tightrope is, Hugh, because quite simply, Philippe Clement, with his side, has to be able to keep winning games just to stave off any revolt from fans, any criticism, while the AGM comes up. The AGM comes up, and the last thing you want with that AGM is a game lost further behind Celtic, a European defeat that's not acceptable. So all of that's in the melting pot.
But John will be looking at it the other way. He'll be sitting there and say, well, we beat Dundee United, we beat Dundee. Well, a great shout against Motherwell getting the League Cup. Imagine if we just have one of the days at Hampden, win the League Cup, we do all right in Europe. As he pointed out, we should be beating teams in Scotland. He said that we've got, no matter what. And he always think, imagine we came to Christmas or New. He'll be thinking positively, and he actually used that word when he was talked about, can we challenge, can we win the league? And he went, of course we can. And I think that was the best answer to give, because although people now say, if you're the chairman of Rangers and you're sitting at a press conference in September, and somebody says, can you win this season's league? The answer's straightforward. You can't give it straight down. Of course we can.
Yeah.
But he'll be looking at it on the positive side, because life is tough enough for John Gilligan at the moment, without lying in bed at the 2:00 in the morning tribunals, thinking about bad results in Malmo, slipping up against Motherwell at Hampden. Because these things can happen to any football club.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how it all develops. But I wish him the very best. I've got a lot of time for John. I think he's a really nice man. And, in that short period of time, we'll see how it all develops. A couple of topics I want to talk about before we finish. One of them is for me the most interesting case that's just bubbling along and will do for the next 10 weeks, which is Manchester City, which again, there are a number of clubs who have gone on record as saying they're not putting up with what Manchester City have been allegedly doing. And this case against Manchester City with 115 charges to answer, it's amazing on the basis that nobody would have known about this had it not been for, you might not know his name, Rui Pinto, who is the football equivalent of Julian Assange, You know, he hacks into emails and suddenly reveals 1,000,001 things, you know, that, you know, maybe Beckham's agent wasn't too happy that he didn't get Sir David Beckham. But nevertheless, you know, there was an allegation that Manchester City had received £200 million from Abu Dhabi, which was disguised as sponsorship money, you know, to bolster Manchester City's accounts. That's an allegation that they have to answer. So there's two levels to this. Should we have hackers, you know, exposing these things, and then with the charges that come with it, everybody's waiting to see, well, if any of those 115 charges stick.
How many do you think will stick?
Well, that's like you saying to me, can you give me the 6 lottery numbers? Because quite simply, remember, Alison, and this is the case for anybody in any capacity dealing with a legal issue, depending on the counsel you have and how shrewd they are, you know, the best lawyers that are hired for this for Manchester City could argue anything on a technicality. Never mind, did you receive this money, or have you been, have you been breaking certain Premier League rules and financial fair play? They can argue technicalities non-stop on it.
I think that's key. I think you used the word counsel. I think Man City will have invested in the most prestigious legal team imaginable.
Well, they have, because that's why we've been kicked down all the way to now for the 10-week. It should have been decided long ago.
And that's exactly what you will see here. They'll be stalling, they'll be kicking it down, there'll be arguments over every single technicality on it. I'd be amazed to see I'll be really interested to see how much of it actually sticks.
And then, of course, by how much of it sticks, if at all. Because remember, you could suddenly say, right, they've been cleared of all 115 charges, because I still operate on the basis of innocent until proven guilty. Maybe it doesn't happen in social media these days, but that's the way you have to operate on it. But the other question that flips in then, Hugh, is if any of the major charges they're found guilty of, what's the punishment?
It's funny because I look at this case in terms of legal representation as Manchester City versus Maidstone United. And Manchester City v Maidstone United might be on the football pitch a prospect if they do send them down. I don't think that it'll get to that. I always think, you know, we've said it before in this show, remember the golden rules. Them that has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah.
Right? and if I'm looking at this to think that the authorities, FA and obviously to a certain extent the English Premier League, they'll have resources for lawyers. They'll have decent lawyers. But many they have. Say they've got 5-10 lawyers working on this full time, which would be a huge expense. Would you imagine what Manchester City's got working on this?
Yeah.
They'll have literally the best lawyers in the world, and the best lawyers in the world will have the best students or just graduated, the 20 best Harvard law students have just come out, be sitting in a room at the moment, and they'll be looking through all those contracts underneath these lawyers saying, find us a way out of this, a word, a comma, a semicolon.
Well, see, but to be fair to Manchester City, Hugh, as well as us all being aware of people can win a case on technicalities, right? They may well also, and I am not in any way going to, you know, at this moment state innocence or guilt on it, but they may well be looking and saying, listen, can we legitimately argue the case? You know, at the moment they've slightly moved the goalposts in what they're arguing as we move forward towards this case. But you know, they've got to look at it and say, can we legitimately argue the case of what we're being accused of? That's the first thing. Secondary to that is the next layer, which is the ultimate one. How can we look at the technicalities to get away with a number of the charges? And then the third one after that is how do you deal with legally any punishment that comes your way? And what is that punishment?
But the technicality getting out of the real one will be, I don't think anybody's under any misapprehension that Manchester City have got a wad of money from certain sources, and outside sources have said, oh, you're using this money is not competitive, this is not reasonable sponsorship money, this is not reasonable naming rights, this is not a reasonable way to spend money on players as vis-a-vis our constitution. To get round that, Man City will be involved in the real detail, will be involved in the detail of it. The bigger point of whether in a capitalist society Manchester City basically should be doing whatever they want with their money and their sponsor is one that we'll have to leave for another programme.
Yeah.
I think people are talking about this case being going to take some time, and it might take weeks and all this.
Well, it's 10 weeks maximum.
Yeah, then that's maximum to solve the initial process of this case. Because if it gets to Manchester City lose in any way of this case, that's just the end of ding ding round one.
Yes.
Then the case starts
Goes to an appeal.
Because it'll not only just go to appeal in sporting courts, it could go, and this is be huge if I were thinking of it, Manchester City could burst the ball and say, we're taking this out of sporting arbitration, and we're going to the real boys, we're going to the High Court, which of course is football clubs are, shall we say, strongly discouraged to do that. In fact, face sanctions for doing that. But I can see this, if they lose after the 10 weeks, I think that may just signal the start of them.
And there's all sorts of wild speculation on what, if anything, will be, in many people's eyes, acceptable as a punishment if they are found guilty. If they are guilty of a number of charges which have minor penalties, but if they're found guilty of the big ones, Alison, you've got clubs and you've got fans questioning, and I think we're thin on the ground for sporting integrity at the best of times. But
it's a loaded phrase.
Well, of course, there's no such a thing as sporting integrity.
Shorthand in Scotland.
But what you actually suggest is, well, what is acceptable to people? Because you know what's going to happen. People are going to go, you're going to give them
Well,
even £100 million fine.
I was going to say, I find that any kind of financial penalty is no penalty.
No, not at all.
So what is it?
Well, what is it? Is it stripped of titles? Is it banned from Europe?
That opens the door. It opens a can of worms. It opens an absolute can of worms.
On that fact, if you said to, I would imagine, if you said to, and I have no reason to have nobody inside Manchester City, of course, I think if Manchester City was offered with, a financial penalty now, they'd walk away because it'd actually be cheaper than the lawyer's bill, which must be eye-watering. Then I think if they went down the Everton route or the Nottingham Forest route of getting a points deduction, I think they would take that as well, because at worst they might have to say it was a substantial point deduction and they were immediately placed in a relegation battle. They could say, well, we'll have to write off European qualification this year, etc., etc.
But it's a season.
It's a season.
Yeah.
And the kind of... It would have to be a right thumping 30-pointer before it would. It would have to be much more than that
Before it impacts realistically.
Anything. Yeah, they could a 30-pointer. They could probably, I would imagine, get near Europe anyway. But anyway, they would take that as well. I think if you start getting into stripping titles and down leagues, that would be where it grows. Because what happens with down leagues is not that it impacts in any way on the sustainability of the club, because Manchester City have got so much money that they could throw 3 seasons, say, getting back up. But what it does do is it denudes you of your talent, because players are not going to stay for 3 years on the road back up. Buffon might have done so, but and Lee McCullough did so at Rangers. But if you imagine if you're going up to Erling Haaland or Silva or even Gundogan, who's just come back, or De Bruyne and the sort of sunset of his career, except in fact any of the players, Foden, except they say, nah, I'm off.
Yeah. Okay, we'll wait to see how that all unfolds, and then try and sift through it. I'll tell you one thing: we'll sift through it, but we won't offer any legal technicalities on it. We'll just wait to see what the fine is, or if indeed Manchester City come out of it unscathed, because you've got.
That'll be a list for this week then, Peter. The five best. What is it? The 5 best punishments Manchester City can get.
That's your top 5, isn't it? Although to be fair,
If found guilty.
To be fair, if found guilty, try and get a balance on it. Having been, at Radio Clyde as head of sport at the time when everybody was offering their tuppence worth on Rangers and their situation, I'd hate to be the phone in around Manchester right now dealing with it, because everybody's an expert, apart from the people who are actually dealing with the inside knowledge of it. It's hell to play with, as you say, Ali. I like the fact that he's out for 2 weeks with a hamstring, and that was a great game I watched there.
There's good stuff out there. I would say to the viewers, though, if they're really interested in it, Nick Harris, Sporting Intelligence, is he's made it explicable to me.
Okay. Footnote: European football: Dynamo Minsk waiting for Hearts, Malmo for Rangers, Dortmund coming up for Celtic. Just briefly before we finish, optimistic about Rangers against Malmo?
They should win it, I think. I think they should feel as though they can go and get a result. I think they need it. I think they badly need to hang their hat on a positive campaign in Europe. I think they need something just to lift the support and something to show that they're capable of offering something this season that suggests that the team are moving in the right direction.
And of course, Eric Cantona once said, you can change your wife, but you can't change your football club. Real difficult dilemma for you in Dortmund. Will you be in the yellow wall?
Well, I don't think there'll be much of a dilemma. I mean, it's like you've got a football club and you've got a second football club, and there's a fair bit of distance between the two. So I'll look on at that match with great interest, though, because there's already, I love narratives in football, and this narrative, because Dortmund got absolutely pumped at the weekend by Stuttgart, and a really poor performance. They're somewhat in a crisis, and as a Dortmund supporter, Dortmund are always in a crisis. Yeah. Dortmund's get to a Champions League final in the midst of a crisis.
Can you see Celtic going to the Westfalen and winning?
I don't think it's beyond the bounds of. I mean, Rangers did it, so it's not beyond the bounds of possibility. Do I think it's likely? No. I think if you said to Brendan Rodgers in his quieter moments at the moment, if he'd take 1 point from the next 2 games, I think he would say thank you very much, because that would make qualification very, very likely. So I think there's a possibility for Celtic to do well there. I still think Dortmund are favourites, so I think in Malmo it's really interesting for Rangers. Upside for Rangers is that Malmo have a poor record in opening games in Europe and tend not to do well. The upside for Malmo, though, is they've got a good record against Rangers, and they're also well into the season.
Yeah.
Well into the season.
And how much of an inconvenience is Dynamo Minsk for Hearts?
Yeah, it comes at an interesting time for the club, and we spoke about it, the impact of European football on teams that don't have big resources. I think at this point in time, it may well work as some kind of distraction, as you've seen sometimes with cup competitions when a team's floundering in the league. But I think given Hearts' league position and predicament at the minute, they'll want to focus on trying to build themselves up, move up the table. And that is hard when you're coming off the back of travelling Thursday night and then you're facing a game on a Sunday. I think it'll be a tough couple of months for them to handle the dual demands of both. Okay,
probably the first time in the Journos I haven't thrown in a top 5, but I was bound to the pressure of Ali, who's just, just draws me a dirty look, and I have to move on. But it will return next week. Good good topics to discuss there. You can give us your thoughts on it as well in the journals. Thanks to so many of you who are listening to the podcast. And of course, hit the subscribe button and join the football family on our YouTube channel. The figures and of course the support has been absolutely fantastic. We've got some great interviews that we've been giving you in our unique video content. Simon Murray's been interviewed. Mark O'Hara, Alison has been interviewing him as well. And over and above that, there's a brilliant piece with Kerry and Blair have put together on other aspects of football. This, of course, is Hibs. And, you know, that match day experience, what goes on at a club for the full day to make it memorable for a fan. Makes it memorable if you win, and if you get a nice bit of food in there as well, and a few drinks with your pals, it makes it a great day out. So it's a lovely little mini documentary that's there for you to view, and we've got lots more content coming up and competitions that I think you will enjoy. So with that in mind, thank you very much for listening and watching. From Alison, from Hugh and myself. We'll see you next time.